All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whatever time it is you hear this message, I pray that you're poised to receive, to accept, and to respond to words of wisdom. Ashe. Listen, one of the things that I know as your educator, Babalawo, for more than 20 years is that the most difficult challenge, that you face as a learner who is really learning, not just consuming information, but really learning, because when you learn, you change, right? That's the learning and change go together. You can't learn new information or learn new habits, learn new skills, and remain the same, right? So when you learn, you change. And ideally, when you change, it's for the better and you improve. So the most difficult thing, the greatest obstacle to your improvement by way of practicing Orisha lifestyle is unlearning. It's not learning. It's not a question of intelligence. It's a question of your capacity for and your commitment to unlearning all of the things that have been improperly learned. All right. And of course, the most glaring process of unlearning is unlearning Christianity, unlearning Islam, unlearning the Western worldview. That's the big picture. But then on a more granular level, it's also unlearning incorrect information and incorrect reasoning and logic as it pertains to Orisha lifestyle. So you have mislearned or you have learned improper information and practices about our actual tradition. Okay, pause. That's a huge statement. And what makes it so difficult is that this isn't accounting, right? This isn't accounting. You're learning debit and credit. What's a debit? What's a credit? What's a debit? What's a credit? You guys have ever taken account, you know that's a pain in the neck. But it is not that kind of information in the sense that what you're learning about Orisha, what you're learning about your ancestors, what you're learning about your soul, what you're learning about the souls of your children, what you're learning about the meaning of life. This is very internal, it's very personal, it's very intimate. And so when you learn something about the tradition, it assimilates in a very deep place within your own awareness. And so you identify with this knowledge and these practices in a way that is radically different from what you learn about chemistry, what you learn about history, what you learn about science, what you learn about the stars. It's totally different. You're making a much deeper emotional connection. So when you come to a point where you realize, oh, what I learned was not correct, well, it shakes you because now you're having to grasp with all the ways in which you organize your self-concept and your self-image that now you got to reevaluate. It's difficult. I get it. I totally get it. All right. And one of the areas in which this is really difficult is when it comes to Awon Iyami Oshoronga. Right. And so let me back up a little bit because when I look at the ways in which I've had to teach people over decades, once upon a time, when I would tell people, we in Isheshe do not practice astrology. There's no astrology. People didn't believe me. They did not believe me. What? There's no astrology. Oh, you mean there's, and they would, in the mind, immediately the conversation goes to them searching and scraping for different ways in which we have to be practicing astrology. And, I know people would go out and they would do their own research and they would look but you can't find it because there isn't really astrology. We see the stars and there's the moon and the sun and stuff like that, but there's no practice of astrology in Yoruba tradition. It just doesn't exist. I tell people numerology is not part of our practice. What? Numerology is not part of it. And they didn't believe me. And I know that they will go out on their own after I would tell them and break it down to them how we do practice numerology and how it's tied to the language, right? The words the word for, this number or that number is a verb. and so the wordplay is the only way you're really going to see strong numerology in our tradition. Numbers are there, but it's not numerology like you find in other traditions, right? Once upon a time, when I would tell people, listen, everything that we practice, everything, if it is legitimately and authentically in the Yoruba tradition, it's going to come from the Odu Ifa. It's going to come from the Oriki. It's going to come from perhaps local tradition. There are some instances where things have been practiced and passed down ancestrally from one generation to the next. Those are really going to be your main, sources. All this other stuff that people are telling you where they're getting information and they're drawn from, I don't know, they're drawn from science, nuclear physics, they're drawn from all these different ways of knowing. They don't matter. You cannot be looking at the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the Talmud or the periodic table or none of that. If you want to understand Orisha, you're going to go to Odu, you're going to go to Oriki, you're going to go to perhaps local tradition, where in those instances where a local deity, and maybe an ancestor, has become deified, right? Those are special cases. And you probably aren't going to come in contact with any of that. But in the beginning, so to speak, when I would break it down for people, they could not accept that. Oh, they would resist. And I know they would go and they would do their own research. And lo and behold, they would all come to it. How do I know? Because all of the people that I've said these things to over 20 years, openly and directly, none of them have come back to say, guess what, Baba? I found out that actually what you said wasn't correct. It has not happened. It's not going to happen. Because I'm not making wild claims. I'm telling you what I know about the tradition based on how I have been taught. All right. Now, I don't want to imply that if you don't know what I know, then you don't know anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I know what I know. Okay. And the last thing I'll say before we get into this particular lesson is part of the reason that I know is that, like along the same lines that I was just saying about once upon a time, people didn't really know and believe that the Odu Ifa was the definitive source for knowledge, is because until it's only within the last 15 years that we in the diaspora have had direct contact with Odu Ifa. Okay. It's only in the last about 15 years, which means that if you have a teacher or a mentor who was around before that time, the only source of direct text that they had or direct instruction that they had was Epega, right? The Afolabi Epega wrote the book, The Sacred Ifa Oracle, which, by the way, is only half the book. That's not the whole book. And Epega didn't write the book. His father wrote the book, and Epega translated half of the book. How do I know? Because I've seen and held and taken notes from the actual book. This is Bay Area Babalawo Folklore 101. All of us who were from the Bay Area and were around in the 90s, the early 90s and onward, we all have these notebooks that, and everyone can attest to what I'm telling you. Epega's book is only half the book. Okay? So, but that was the only thing people had. That was the only full compendium of all the 256 Odu, with the medicines and the structure, etc. Before that, we had Baskins' book, Ifa Divination, Communication Between Men and Gods. And if you have that book, you know that it's incomplete. And it was so early in the game that Baskin, who was a very astute researcher, didn't even realize that the structure of the verses were verses. It was like a poetic stanza. He has them written out in all kind of a skitter scatter format that you got to really take your time to tease through it. But and then the other source was the Cuban Encyclopedia, the encyclopedia. That was it. And if you didn't speak Spanish, then and the encyclopedia didn't mean nothing because you couldn't read it anyway. So those were the sources for every one of your teachers who was around more than 15 years ago. Okay? That is the equivalent to basically, you know, all of our instruction and our guidance, the people were kind of only able to see half the field, or maybe only able to see half the colors, or they could only taste half of the flavors, right? Very, very incomplete. So what did they do? They compensated. Some of them compensated with pure imagination. Some of the stuff that was perpetuated, you know, from the 80s and etc. before, pure imagination. Some of it was they compensated with information from other traditions. This is why you know, you hear people talk about spaceships, vortexes, and time machines, and all kinds of fanciful things. Not real, not at all based on the Orisha tradition, not at all. Others would draw from Hinduism or Buddhism, etc., trying to compensate for the realization that, hey, I know that there's more to this than what I can see, but I have no way of gathering information. I have no way of filling in the blanks. So part of our legacy in the diaspora is reconciling the things that people just didn't know and people just couldn't get access to. It wasn't that they were bad people. It's just that they did not have any way of filling in the whole story. They couldn't. There was no way. Technology wasn't what it is today. This is before cell phones. This is before internet. This is way before social media. So back in that day, you had to directly go and sit down with someone, and he had to tell you. He had to show you. And if you couldn't do that, then you didn't have access. Period. End of story. That's the era that I grew up in. And that's why I know why it's so hard for you to unlearn, because I know the sources of the misinformation. And when I hear you say certain things, I know right away where that notion came from and why it doesn't add up or square with the actual Odisha tradition. One area in which this is very true is when we come to Awon Iyami or Shoronga. 99% of what you think about Awon Iyami is incorrect. It's incorrect. 99%. Why? Because it is a society that by definition is silent. Those who know don't tell. Those who tell don't know. It's that simple. It's that simple. So people going on and on and on and on and telling you these different things about what they are and who they are and what they do and how they behave and all that kind of stuff. The overwhelming majority of it is imagination, or it is borrowed from other traditions. Okay? So, in order for you to grasp this, what I want you to understand is that the Isheshe system is complete. We have our own understanding of what is positive and what is negative. We have our own understanding of how things are done properly and how things are not done, right? What's orthodox and what is not orthodox. It is a complete system. And that matters because, quite frankly, what we have experienced and are experiencing is that because we are looking as human beings for ways in which to explain our experience, to rescue our own consciousness from the ravages and the madness of Western civilization, we've looked to Odisha lifestyle as the remedy, as our medicine, as our refuge and our sanctuary, right? And so women in particular will look to Awon Iyami as this place where they can find all of that, right? Which it can be. but it's not the nature of it by definition. That's not why it's created. That's not the function that it has in our cosmology, right? Just like charms and magic and different kinds of spiritual power, right? In our present Itatoku, I'm talking about within the temple, we have our 16-day divination. It's interesting that right now there's a verse that Ifa tells us about, and this is one of many, 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 many verses that follow the same, line of thinking. Ifa says, power and magic is for special days, but wisdom and sacrifice is for every day. Which means Ifa is very, very reticent about overusing charms and magic. In fact, the Babalawo is very strongly discouraged from overusing charms and magic. Instead, we are encouraged to make more use of sacrifice and the sacred text of Ifa. Let Ifa guide you because this is going to align with your destiny. Okay? And so the ones who refuse to do that they end up becoming cautionary tales. The one who blows black smoke will have black smoke blown back on them. The black smoke is, is the powder that people use for magic. It's basically saying if you use magic, you're going to become drunk. The one who has excessively powerful medicines and charms will become drunk by those charms. These are the kind of messages that Ifa teaches us to say, you gotta be very, very cautious about the use of magic and charms, right? In the unlearning process, that your mind may not want to accept that we don't encourage the use of magic and charms because you may have come to this in desperate need of power. And so to hear these constant messages to say, that's not the way we do it. You got to unlearn that. Otherwise, you're going to reject the message and you're going to keep seeking and practicing things in a way that are incongruent with what Ifa really has in store for you to fulfill your destiny. Likewise, Awon Iyami is recognized as a dangerous force. It is. It's like fire. It's like, a sharp knife, right? It's impartial. It's not something that, leans this way or that way. It's a force of nature and it can work for you or work against you just like that. But you have to unlearn the idea that this is something that has been created to nurture and, be your fairy godmother. Okay. So the reason why this lesson is so important, partially is because I want you to understand, what Awon Iyami truly is. Just as an educator, I think it's important that you just have a clear definition of what you're actually looking at, right? But more importantly, what I want you to do is I want you to unlock within your own consciousness the capacity, the greatest capacity possible to unlearn. That's the most important part. If you can exercise the will and the capacity and the skill that's necessary to unlearn, there's no limit to how much you can gain and grow and improve from your practice of Orisha lifestyle. Because there's way more than astrology that you need to, delve into. So much more than magic, so much more than even Awon Iyami that awaits you on the other side of, let's say, the Western worldview. All these hurdles and obstacles and difficulties in your understanding are the only thing that stand in the way of you actually thinking and being the way the originals were. That's the goal, to recapture and restore the original African mind so that you can exist in the way that the divinities existed. So you can exist in the way that the original people existed. You can reclaim for yourself your own original thought, but you have to uncondition yourself. You have to unlearn all these habits of mind that give you comfort, that give you security, that make you feel safe, but also box you in and limit you and prevent you from being fully expressed. So it's an ironic part of the learning process. So many of the things that we cling to for comfort and security are also the things that keep us trapped in unhealthy, unsafe spaces in our own minds. This is a message for the leaders. I'm looking for people who are ready to improve the world through positive influence. If you're one of those people, I want you to visit me at obafemio.com or orishalifestyle.com. Get enrolled, get the books, review all the videos. Let's start working together to help you live the medicine that will heal your life and heal the lives of those who you are destined to serve. I look forward to working with you. Bye for now. Odabo.